And then around 1950, my dad started another business. He started a liquor business with his younger brother. They were partners. And one of their first customers was Mrs. Kay O'Malley, who was Walter O'Malley's wife. And he, of course, was the president of the Brooklyn Dodgers. Mrs. O'Malley took care of all the local marketing and became a regular customer. And at that time, my brother was very, very ill. He had a huge tumor in his neck. And doctors both on Long Island and in New York City were trying to figure out how to deal with this thing. And Mrs. O'Malley, when she was a very young woman, had laryngeal cancer and had a complete laryngectomy. And she spoke in a whisper for the rest of her life. So having gone through this horrendous experience herself, she's a very kind person. And she was always telling my dad or my mom, you know, how she prayed for my brother Jim every morning. She's a devout Catholic and went to Mass every morning and would always say special prayers for him. And that meant a great deal to my parents. And then as things turned out, unfortunately, Jim had to have a radical neck dissection. And of course, she was more and more supportive. But getting back to the Dodgers, that's how we came to know Mrs. O'Malley. They had moved to my hometown, Amityville, I think around 1950. And they lived there until the infamous year around 1957 or 1958, when Mr. O'Malley took the Dodgers to Los Angeles. And he's been a bad word in Amityville ever since, unfortunately. But anyway, getting back to Mrs. O'Malley, she had her own season pass to the Dodgers when they played in Ebbits Field. Every year she would rotate that pass and give it to each one of the merchants to use. And as far as I remember, it was a 2-seater box. So anyway, when I was about 7, my dad had his turn with the pass. Well, we drove into the stadium, and I don't remember much about that, but I remember stepping into the stadium, and I was only 7 or 8, and this was such a different experience. There were tiers of all these screaming people, and they had homemade placards. There was a lady with cowbells who used to ring the cowbells to get the cheer going. And we found our seats, and they were right by the first base line, and the players were in the dugout beneath. And I remember the first thing they did was come out to sing the national anthem, and they all stood along the first base line. And, you know, they had their caps over their hearts, and, you know, we put our hands over our hearts while the national anthem was sung. And we were singing the national anthem, and there was this tall, really good-looking guy on the end. And he kept looking at me, and then he started to wink at me. And I must have been beaming, because he would wink, and then I would wink. And this went on for a couple of verses of the national anthem. And then they finished the national anthem. And if I remember, I think he just gave me a little salute with his cap, with this beautiful big grin on his face. The very tall man was Preacher Rowe, the starting pitcher for that game. Well, the next thing I remember was when the umpires all came out in the field, and they came out on the field together. And then the organ started to play Three Blind Mice, which I knew from school. And everybody started laughing hysterically. They thought that was so funny. And I said, "Daddy, what's so funny about that?" He said, "Well, you know the song. They're saying that the umpires are blind, and they're the ones that are supposed to figure out, you know, whether the plays are legal or not. And I said, oh, that is funny. I like that. So then the game began, and I, of course, had my eyes the whole time on Preacher Row. He was up on this big mound, and it's just carried away with it. And I remember that, you know, the thrill of every time you'd hear that bat crack. And, you know, I was hoping it would go way out over the far outfield fence. But then, you know, it bounced sometimes, and there were these guys, like I found out later, Pee Wee Reese, I think, was the shortstop, and just make these amazing maneuvers and scoop the ball off the ground and make this fast throw to the catcher, who was Roy Campanella. I thought this was the most exciting thing I had ever seen. If they made a really good play, this lady with the cowbells would stand up and she would just ring. You could hear them throughout the stadium. And not only would she ring the bells, she had a lot of very vocal comments, you know, positive and negative. Oh, you could hear her because it was a small stadium. Ebbits Field was small, which was one of the nice things about it for me, you know. But it was really too small. And that location, those were two of the reasons that they really decided they needed a bigger stadium. But that game still sticks in my memory because it's Preacher Row. I can still see that face with that big smile and winking at me.